guys, this is AYOKAY, and we are here in my home studio in Los Angeles, California. My career in music has really had two distinct parts to it. On one half, I'm a touring electronic artist, producer that has released 2.5 albums, has been on multiple countrywide tours. I've been with Columbia Records for 4 years, I think, and then I'm currently at Capitol Records and have been for a year. I've been also very fortunate to have a whole nother side of my career that's been producing for pop artists. That kind of started with this, my best friend and hometown buddy, Quinn XCII. We've been working together for 6 or 7 years, and I've been very fortunate to have been part of 2 of his albums and multiple EPs. And that led, as time has gone on, has led to me working with this artist, Chelsea Cutler, who's a very close friend of mine, and Jeremy Zucker. And those 3 artists kind of have been the main collaborators in the pop sphere, where I've worked more as an executive producer, producing for them. And I've had these 2 paths that have both like worked with each other, played into each other, and it's great for me because I get to exercise such different parts of my brain in both. So originally I'm from Michigan, I'm from a suburb of Detroit, and my path in music really started. I'm one of the few musicians that will ever say this, but I didn't really listen to music until like high school. I don't know what I was doing before then, but I was not listening to music. I was a very weird kid. And I kind of started getting into it. My first memories of like making music is my parents had a grand piano at their house, the one that I grew up in. I remember distinctly, like kind of when I was in early high school, maybe middle school, I would be at that piano tinkering, paying less attention to the sheet music and more attention to just making up my own, my own melodies and chords. I think that was my first inkling to like really wanting to create. And at the time, my older brother was living at home as well. He was in medical school and he played guitar, drums, made all sorts of music. And for me, I learned GarageBand as a way of recording him and like spending time with him, and I was just purely the guy in GarageBand tracking whatever he wanted to do. And he had, at the time, a couple of buddies that were rapping. And kind of we all together in the basement of my parents' house like started making songs and recording them. At the same time, I had this buddy in high school, his name was Mike Timrowski, and he was rapping at the time, and that was all the craze. So he would bring over these beats for me to chop up in GarageBand, and my only job was to record him rapping. We did that all through high school, so amateur, with a couple of buddies of ours, formed a little rap collective. Sometimes I would intermix my brother's world of music with Mike's world of music. And yeah, I was working mostly on hip hop, just chopping up beats and recording people rapping. The next part of the story though was I went off to the University of Michigan. I entered just the general studies program. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and all 4 above me went to Michigan and my parents went to Michigan. So I was destined for that. And Mike, meanwhile, went to Michigan State University, which is about an hour and a half away by car. As fate had it, we were back home for a summer, I think our sophomore year, and we were both at the gym, just getting swole. And we were in the parking lot of the gym in our hometown. We ran into each other, and he was like, "Wait, are you still doing music?" And I was like, "Yeah, like I'm still recording. Like, are you still rapping?" And he was like, "Yeah." So he came over that day, and we recorded the first song that he would release as Mike T. That would eventually go on to become Quinn XCII. In our time in college, we would eventually start to write the first project we ever released, Change of Scenery, which was his EP that put him onto the map. We recorded so DIY. We were clearing out closets, setting up a microphone in there with clothes all around to try to pad the sounds. I was renting out computer science rooms at the university for us to just set up a microphone in. Everything was DIY. We had nothing. We had no equipment. And that's where we made some of the most impactful music that we've ever made, some of the music that he's to this day known for after doing it for 6 years. Once we released Change of Scenery, we started getting label calls from Atlantic Records. We flew out to LA for the first time to meet with Atlantic Records, and we thought, this was it, we made it. And meanwhile, while I was making these beats for him, I was also starting to get more and more into electronic music and starting to make instrumentals for myself. One day we were in the studio and I played him this instrumental that I had been working on, and he recorded over it. And as soon as we were finished, I went home that night and I said to him and my manager, like, "What do you think about this being my first release as AYOKAY?" That song was Kings of Summer, which now is a certified platinum record, and I owe my entire career to that song and that decision to have that be my song featuring him.
Jumping off the porch like mom's not home. Tell me why the best things feel so wrong. Summer nights, love them how they take so long. Run with the feeling of being alive while we're still young. The porch like mom.
The story of how Kings of Summer caught on is a very interesting one. I didn't have Spotify at the time. This was in 2016, I think right as Spotify was starting to take off. The song had been released on SoundCloud for a year already. And I was on winter vacation and one of my friends texted me like, yo, you're like #2 on the Spotify viral charts. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but cool. And so I go on Spotify, I look up what that is. And I was #2 on the US viral charts. And then the next day I went to #1 on the US viral charts. And then the day after that, I went to #1 on the global viral charts. And at the time, that was pretty much like the virality of these songs on Spotify were the amount people were sharing them, whatever. And it went to #1 on the charts from literally nothing to #1 on the charts in US and global. And that caught a lot of people's attention. The next thing that was crazy is a Texas Rangers baseball player used the song as his walk-up song. And the song blew up in Texas. It became the #1 most Pandora'd song in Texas. And that flags all of the label, algorithms. Before you knew it, we had signed to Columbia Records. We signed to the same A&R, and I was still producing for him a ton, but I also had my own project going, and things were cruising. Once Mike and I were kind of really doing our thing, I found this girl on SoundCloud who was making these indie covers of electronic songs, and I became obsessed. Her name was Chelsea Cutler. I followed her on SoundCloud. I was trying to get in a session with her, couldn't do it. When I signed with my manager, who was managing Quinn at the time, I told him the first thing is when you sign me, you have to get me in a session with Chelsea Cutler. That's it. Finally, I was in New York where she was based. We got in a session together. We wrote one of my biggest songs. And as soon as we left that session, I was like, you have to meet my manager. He's gonna adore you. Let's do it. So I take her up, she meets him, they hit it off, and immediately he signs her. The next addition to the team was Jeremy Zucker, who had reached out to Quinn on SoundCloud maybe a year or two prior to this, and they had done a song together purely over the internet. And after that, Jesse, our manager, stayed in touch with Jeremy and just kept watching him grow, and finally reached out and said, I'd like to sign you as well. Jeremy said yes, and there you had it. We had a collective, all under the same manager, me, Quinn XCII, Chelsea Cutler, and Jeremy Zucker. We named ourselves Mutual Friends. That's the name of the collective and the management company, which I always think is cute because it really was this relationship friend world where we all had interconnections, organic connections to one another, person to person. It wasn't forced. It wasn't anybody put us in touch. We naturally gravitated towards each other, and we came together as a unit that was really bonded on a similar taste in music, similar values, and just a similar drive. And I think that made us unique, and we were all friends at the core of it and collaborators on top of that. Through the years, everybody kind of had their independent successes, and their paths took them on such different wild adventures and roads with tours across the world, etc. And it leaves not a lot of time to be able to keep up with the people that you're close to. So when the pandemic hit, it was so hard and difficult for everybody in such different ways. But I think, one thing that everybody learned was the importance of that root human connection and how much we longed for it, and that was really the key to life. So about a year or a year and a half into the pandemic, everybody had been hitting their heads against the wall creatively because there's nothing to write about when you're sitting in your house alone. We had the idea of why don't we all quarantine together in a pod and go away somewhere and just write. Lock ourselves in a house for a week, no distraction, and just write music. This idea first originated with me, Quinn XCII, and our manager, Jesse. And then we eventually added on our producer friend, Tom, also known as Hazy Eyes. But we decided we'd go to my parents' house in Newport, Rhode Island. They had a second home there that they had just gotten about a year and a half prior, and I hadn't really gone much. And we thought it'd be the perfect spot to just go escape. It's in the middle of nowhere, essentially. At this point, it had been nearly 2 years since I had worked with Quinn. We had both been so busy with our own stuff that we really hadn't ever had time to just return back to each other and make music together again. And so we thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to make a second part to our EP, our debut EP, Change of Scenery. We thought that this would be the opportunity to go away and write that project. So we found ourselves in the middle of Rhode Island, in the middle of the shutdown, with nothing to do but be locked in the house and write music. And we didn't bring much equipment. I brought a microphone, a MIDI keyboard, 2 speakers that we bought from Guitar Center locally, and I think that was it. I think Tom brought a couple of guitars that he had, and we just set up in the living room of the house in Rhode Island. We moved out all the chairs, set up on a desk, and we put the 2 speakers just sitting on the desk, and we literally wrote an album in 2 weeks.
Christmas morning, 1998. Jesse, what'd you get? A table, yay!
1 AirPod in.
I actually gotta put this car on stuff out there. I like when you were late on it though. Weekend, yeah.
When we were there, it was crazy. We were writing 2 to 3 songs a day. It was unlike anything that I've ever experienced. Usually it takes me 3 months to finish a song. But here, we would wake up in the morning, write 1 song, midday, switch to another, and at night, we'd either make some joke EDM song or a hardcore hip-hop song. At 1 a.m. we'd start writing that and be up till 3. It felt like summer camp, but we were writing really, really good music. I think what was so inspiring about it is, for the first time, it was me running the laptop, and we had Tom running his laptop separately and coming out of his interface into 2 channels on my interface. So we had 2 computers running simultaneously, his into mine, out the speakers. I could do sounds on mine, he could do his, and we had Mike in the back of the room writing. And there were enough minds at play that an idea never would go stale. If I ran into a block, Tom would be able to get me out of it. And then Mike would be there steering the ship in one other direction. And it was this constant flux of it never became solid. It was always liquid and morphing, and it just felt so, it was an incredible workflow of having 2 producers and the singer and people that I knew and trusted and felt comfortable around. This first experience was honestly so much fun that it made Mike and I fall in love with making music again. We had been doing it at that point for, 6 or 7 years, and eventually it becomes your job, right? It becomes your passion, but it's really also your job. And this was our first opportunity in so long to get rid of LA, prominent songwriters, these big producers that have all these big cuts and all of that. And it was just about the 2 of us plus Tom just being in a room, inspiring ourselves, not caring about what was popular mainstream at the time, but just what felt cool to us in the room at that moment. And that was really returning to our roots for us, because the biggest music that we'd made was made in Michigan, in my parents' house, in the closets there, at the University of Michigan, in a basement. All of these DIY places that were out of the sphere of New York or LA, where you have all these prominent people, and really just had us doing our thing, following our own instincts. And this was it felt like such a return to that. I think the other really cool thing about it is we turned it into a full 360 media conglomerate. We had a videographer come and document all of it. He had the starts and finish of every song on the album, and he ended up making a documentary about the making of the album. We brought an engineer in at the end. We were recording on the first floor in the living room. In the basement underneath was a carpeted room. And an engineer came in and he turned the basement into a vocal booth, and we recorded all of the final vocals for the album in the basement there. So the house was cooking out. We had maybe 6 people in the house, and every role was filled, and we walked away with all the music videos for the album. When we would finish a song, we would leave the house that day with our videographer, and we would shoot the music video in Rhode Island, us just clowning around. All of the content was made in those 2 weeks, compressed together, and it all had this feeling and this this emotion to it because it was all derived in the same amount of time, in the same mind space. And like through that, we were reliant on nobody but ourselves. And I think that's a really important lesson is I think it's so easy to fall into this trap of you need X, Y, and Z to make music on a professional level. And I think, you know, here we were taking this artist that has 7 million monthly listeners who sells out Radio City in New York for 2 nights. We took him to Rhode Island off the map, had an incredible time, and in 2 weeks delivered him an entire album cycle for Columbia Records, all of the things fulfilled in 2 weeks. After the success of the first trip with Quinn, we decided to ask Chelsea if she wanted to go and do the trip. And it was kind of going to be the same setup. It would be me, Chelsea, Tom, and we'd bring Mike Quinn as a co-writer, and we would just go and try to repeat the whole thing and see if it worked again. So we went to Newport again, and it was just as successful as the first run. We were cranking out music with Chelsea. She works in a very different way. Quinn is like, he can just bump through songs. He's very fast because he's not as involved in the production. He has his opinion on how he wants it to be, but he's not a producer. Chelsea had a different approach because she's a producer and a singer. So she's very meticulous about each part. And the very cool thing about this like system that we set up is it's so adaptable. The me, Tom, and Mike is that kind of being the always present trio holding it down. Whatever the artist was in that room, beyond that, we could morph to their needs. So Chelsea had a very different process, and we made it work. We were writing, again, at least 1 song a day, sometimes 2. So the first trip went so well that we went back a second week for Chelsea, like a month later. And in that time, we wrote probably 10 to 12 songs, and she ended up keeping 6 or 7 of them for her album, When I Close My Eyes, that just released, 3 or 4 months ago. Then after Chelsea, we asked Jeremy if he wanted to go on a trip. And so he said yes. And he is the most meticulous out of all of us. He's just so dialed into every single detail along the way. So we weren't cranking through songs with him in the same way, but we wrote maybe 5 or 6 songs that ended up comprising half of his album, Crusher, that just came out again like 4 or 5 months ago. And the process worked great with him. Again, he was such a different artist to work with, but we adapted. And with him, he's also a producer. So we really had 3 producers in the room. He was doing a lot of, the vocal melodies, and Quinn would help him write. And it just was this process of like always staying fluid, always whatever. And another great thing about Rhode Island is the food is the best in the world. The seafood is just on another level. So, we'd work all day, we'd order in whatever seafood we wanted, we would stuff our faces. And it's just, summer camp in the middle of Rhode Island. To me, of the 6 trips that we ended up taking, I think one of like the funniest anecdotes was that when the very first trip, I think this is day 3 of being in Newport, we wrote this song for Quinn called Stay Next to Me. We were all so psyched on it. We had this drum loop. We started with this drum loop that ended up with piano chords. Mike ended up singing and writing the vocal on top of it. And we felt something was so strong about the vocal, but there was something about the instrumental that just wasn't doing it. So we were about to abandon the idea. And then Tom came in and was like, no, this drum loop is so good, the vocal is so good, let's try to flip it, we can make this happen. So right when we were about to abandon it, we take one more stab, we strip everything but the vocal and the drums, and Tom gets on the keys and lays down this new chord progression that we were all like, finally, this is it, we unlocked the song. As soon as I leave that trip, I go home and I'm FaceTiming Chelsea and I'm like, this was the most amazing experience ever. You got to come to Newport. Like, this was just so amazing. And I play for her on FaceTime. I'm like, you got to hear this one song. We secretly wanted her to get on the song, but I didn't want to just downright ask her. So I play her the song over FaceTime, and she, 2 seconds in, she's like, I need to be on this. Like, what do I have to do to be on this? I'm like, yes, I did it. So she records over it and they duet it, Stay Next to Me, Quinn XCII featuring Chelsea Cutler. We made it in the living room of that Newport house. On the next trip we go back, actually I think it was to write for Chelsea 7-8 months later, in the winter now, Mike was doing the performance of Stay Next to Me on the James Corden late night show. And we watched his live performance of the song. It was pre-recorded because of COVID. We watched his live performance of the song on the late show in the living room, right next to where we wrote the song 7 months prior. So how like full circle that was so crazy.
Now look at this. This is an exclusive. No one's seen this your album artwork yet. And I was looking at this. I think it's a brilliant cover. Who's this on the top here? And where are you in this photo?
That's my friend
Alex, that's your
Alex, producer, and we shot that cover here in Newport, Rhode Island, where I am right now. It's where we made the entire album, and it was just kind of a chance for us to get away from Los Angeles and channel some inspiration, and kind of start from scratch and like channel that energy we had as musicians the day we started making music. So yeah, we just found this island called Rose Island, and it's got a very like Wes Anderson vibe to it. So we just stuck with it, and I'm really into it. So this is the first time anyone's seen it, so I'm honored to preview it on your show. This is fantastic.
Well,
it comes out March 5th.
March 5th, the album's out, and we are so honored.
The nice little cap to the story is after all was said and done, after I think we had 6 Newport trips under our belts, we got to all play Red Rocks Amphitheater together. There was a show that the 4 of us had booked together, all in the lineup, just the 4 of us, the Mutual Friends on the Rocks show. That was supposed to be in May when the world shut down in the pandemic, so it got postponed. And we were able to get another spot. It was this past August, and the 4 of us got to play for a sold-out Red Rocks together. So many songs that we had worked on for each other. You know, Mike was playing mostly Change of Scenery, the album, which is what we had made in Newport. And it was just crazy to see all of this come to life on like the most grand scale, and to be with like my 3 best musician friends, like doing something that so many people dream of. It was just honestly the most rewarding, best night of my entire life. So I think my most important takeaway in the whole experience is I feel like I've had such a fulfilling music career because I've worked with my friends and people that I genuinely was drawn to, independent of success, of, you know, anything external. I just felt drawn to them because I like them creatively. I like them as humans. And each relationship that we've built in this industry has been an addition onto this block. We've built, like, between my manager, me, and Quinn to start it, we had this family dynamic to us. We were all best friends, and, you know, we worked together. And slowly that kept adding on, and I feel like every person that's been attracted to our sphere or added in has that same value to them. And I think, like, that's what makes, when you win with people that you care about, it just makes it feel so much better. And I know, like, after we took Chelsea to Newport, she was like, I never want to make music with anybody else again. Mike said the same thing afterwards. And it's just like this family dynamic of working with people that you actually care about, that trusts your instincts and you trust them, and that are there for you, not just to get a big single or one cut on your album, but like holistically want you to succeed and are there for whatever that journey entails. I think doing that is the most important thing. And I think, yeah, I'm most grateful for having those relationships. I think the Mutual Friends crew is like family to me. And I think that I owe my career to being born next to Quinn XCII as he owes that to me. And I think that energy just kept growing. And now nearly 7 or whatever years into my career in music, I think the one thing I would say is you don't need to be in the room with the biggest pop artist or the biggest pop writer or producer. You just know people that know you and know your style and want to see you improve, not for their own gain. And it doesn't take much. It takes a laptop, a MIDI keyboard, a couple of guitars maybe, and a microphone, and you can set up in a living room. It's honestly better to do it that way than to be in a fancy studio with a big console and all this gear that scares you. It's just about making yourself comfortable to create and express in a way that you don't feel pressured, where just your genuine truth is coming out of you. I think that's what leads to success.